watching NBC Super Channel.
Hello and welcome to another Europe 2000. In this week's programme, accusations of a fortress Europe. Are immigration crackdowns being used to make political capital at home? Europe's missing millions. Who's to blame for the latest catalogue of fraud and mismanagement? Basking in the Balearics, a new Spanish home from home for Europe's business community. And Stone Age meets computer age, the time machines that take you virtually into the past. Immigration has become a hot topic right across Europe. Tackling the problem has revealed divisions within Europe's supposedly common policy, with several governments planning their own independent solutions. Both Britain and Italy want to introduce controversial new measures. And in Germany, it's nearly cost the foreign minister his job. Klaus Kinkel's crime was to cancel an international conference aimed at improving understanding between Westerners and Muslims. But he postponed the conference after MPs forced him to withdraw an invitation to the Iranian foreign minister because he had praised the murder of Yitzhak Rabin. As Malcolm Shepherd reports, European tolerance of immigrants, legal and illegal, is now at a post-war low.
For many illegal immigrants, the passage to a new life is a hazardous one. These Moroccans are part of a constant flow across the Mediterranean to the shores of Spain. Not all survive, and many are caught, but the dream of work and European wages is a powerful incentive. There are up to 15 million immigrants living legally in Europe. Nobody really knows how many illegal immigrants there are, or if they do, they're not saying.
Illegal immigration is one of the most potent and powerful symbols of a country's security. Therefore, illegal immigration is deliberately kept secret. Estimates are never given out. So overall, estimates in the European Union can vary wildly, and of course politicians use the figures that are appropriate to their argument.
In last week's state opening of Parliament in Britain, the government announced plans to tighten immigration laws. The Italian government, under pressure from right-wing parties, was also discussing tougher legislation. The ports of Italy are a popular immigration point for North Africans. Once in, the open borders of the European Union means that moving from one country to another is easy. Earlier this year, the Schengen Accord between 7 European countries came into force, abolishing passport controls. France quickly pulled out of the agreement, claiming the others were not doing enough to stop drug trafficking and illegal immigration. In Germany, attacks on legal immigrants are continuing. Germany is home to the largest immigrant population in Europe, among them 2 million Turkish people.
The multicultural aspect of the European Union is nothing new. What is new is the heightening of racism. Turkish workers have been in Germany now for 2 or 3 generations and have helped build up the post-war economy to what it is now. But the fact is that what is changing is not the immigrant population as such, it's the attitudes towards immigration generally, and particularly the attitude towards illegal immigration, pumping up the problem of illegal immigration in relation to settled communities. Settled communities are suffering because of this paranoia with illegal immigration. You're wearing your passport on your face, essentially, and therefore you will be attacked on the basis of race and colour. And that really is the common denominator which cuts across class or what status you have.
The fear now is that the paranoia fostered by extreme right-wing groups across Europe is infecting traditional politics, prompting calls for a more responsible attitude.
Without that kind of approach, we're going to have immigration increasingly being used as a political weapon, an increasingly racist climate, and you will have mainstream politicians rather than fascist politicians using immigration in a very irresponsible way. You will then see more race attacks and a disintegration of some of the harmony that still exists in the European Union.
International politics may have disrupted Klaus Kinkel's attempt to increase understanding with the Muslim world, but until the international community can make staying home more attractive, the flow of immigrants and the tensions they bring with them look set to continue.
Malcolm Shepherd. The row over how the European Union manages its money has erupted once more, with the watchdog Court of Auditors refusing to give their stamp of approval to last year's accounts. Their report levelled serious criticism against member states for failing to keep a proper track of EU funds. It also accused the Commission of failing to provide proper supervision. Well, such accusations are bound to colour arguments over the single currency and a conference this week in London on making monetary union work. Joan Patching reports.
The Court of Auditors in Luxembourg revealed that expenditure of more than £4 billion wasn't properly documented.
I don't think that what we have found that is bigger than in the past. Those findings confirm what we have said on the basis of our examinations of previous accounts.
One example of misspent money was cash paid to tomato growers in Spain, Italy and Greece. The produce had in fact been rotten. The report also criticised payments in general, which encourage farmers to overproduce. It's also revealed that the community is finding it harder to maintain its revenue from customs and excise duties now that many cross-border controls have gone. But while the Commission has been playing down the fraud element of the straying millions, the problem is a real one which the Commissioner for Immigration and Judicial Affairs has been actively trying to solve. She outlined her views to Europe 2000 earlier this year.
What we need is that all countries agree, and this is what's on the table for the ministers now, that offence against EU money is a criminal act. And we should have a law saying that in all countries. We don't have it yet.
The United Kingdom has come in for much criticism for waste and mismanagement of funds from Brussels, as well as shortcomings in raising revenue. It's the sort of irregularity that Britain so often criticise other member states for. While the report points out that individual governments are responsible for 80% of their spending, some think it's unrealistic to expect those member states to keep tabs on European spending.
No, it's ridiculous to blame member states for a design fault in the European system. A lot of European activity is based on subsidy, spending, redistribution. The Commission is constantly bringing forward these schemes. What's missing are proper check mechanisms for them.
The Budget Commissioner, Erkki Liikanen, said the report was a reminder of a need for closer cooperation between the European Union's institutions and states. But he also suggested new penalties might have to be introduced to penalise member states for financial irregularities.
Well, ridiculous or not, the European Commission is firmly putting the onus on national governments to attack the problem. And as you heard, Britain, which has long pointed the finger at other countries over fraud, this time finds itself in the firing line. Joan Patching went to talk to Geoffrey Martin, the head of the Commission office in the United Kingdom. But he was anxious to emphasise that the millions are missing not necessarily through fraud, more through bad management.
Well, it's a report of auditors about the expenditure of funds in the European Union for the year 1994. It is not, therefore, a report about fraud. Indeed, it's almost impossible to determine the extent to which there is fraud, if at all, because some of the paperwork which the respective governments were supposed to give the Commission, who in turn provided these to the Court of Auditors, have not yet been forthcoming. This does not involve some countries, it involves all countries. And until it is clear the extent to which these difficulties have arisen, it is impossible to determine the level of fraud, though I am bound to say that experts in the national governments and in the Commission estimated in previous years that fraud was about 1% of the European Union's budget.
But in any other company, any other organisation, not getting your paperwork done on time would be seen as purely bad management. Isn't that the case here?
Well, it's happening because the European Union is a union of 15 member states with different procedures in their national civil services. It is not a company, therefore. It is a huge body of governments, and with 15 different practices, and with different standards, and sometimes weaker rather than stronger administrations, inevitably difficulties will arise. And the answer to this is that the governments and the authorities in Brussels have to sit down at the same table and agree to tighten the procedures. They have begun to do that because Jacques Santer's Commission has actually placed these things on a higher level of priority than was the case in past years. But as some of the ministers have said, including British ministers, we are actually in this together. This is shared responsibility here. Public opinion in general, I'm sorry to say, tends to blame someone else when a problem arises. And it's the easiest thing in the world to blame the Commission in Brussels. If you're in London, if you're in Frankfurt, if you're in Rome, if you're in Madrid, blame someone else, blame the Commission. What the wider public don't really understand fully enough is the fact that the decision makers in this regard are the ministers sitting around the same table, not the Commission. It is the ministers who decide the rules. It is the ministers who decide the policies. It is simply for the Commission to be their servant and to put before them some ideas as to how the European Union will work better, but they have no vote.
The EU is seen really as a body which spends money left, right and centre. How do you combat that criticism?
Yes, that is a challenge which I do admit is difficult to meet in some countries. In other countries it is easy. In countries like Ireland, for example, or in countries like Italy, what the European Union does is taken for granted as being a good thing. In other countries like the United Kingdom, or to some extent Denmark, this is not the case. And the answer in the last analysis to the problem that you pose is the ministers standing up in their national parliaments explaining how and why they voted alongside their European colleagues. The extent to which national parliaments and national ministers take their responsibilities with their own public is the extent to which their own public will have greater clarity cast upon the European Union and its wondrous workings.
In the auditor's report, agriculture was singled out. Why is that such a difficult area?
Agriculture has been a tremendously difficult area, partly because of the common agricultural policy and the reforms which have been part of its evolution over the course of recent years. Reforms, by the way, which have reduced to nil the butter mountains, the beef mountains, and so on. Also, agriculture takes up a larger proportion of the budget than any other single item. And it's for that reason, as well as because of goods crossing frontiers, that complications have arisen in this particular sector.
Customs fraud has also been singled out as a problem.
Yes, well, as we all know, the Europe of today is the Europe of the single market. And that has meant that in past years, difficulties have arisen at customs posts, which will not arise in the future because there aren't any customs posts. Partly also because there were different levels of VAT, value-added tax, on either side of borders. One can envisage situations, for example, on the Danish-German border where differentiations in the rate of VAT caused tremendous difficulties in the transportation of goods in paperwork and so on. So that's right. Border crossings, when there was no single market, did provide a difficulty. It's important not to overemphasize fraud. That has been the tendency in the populist media across Europe. The fact is that fraud represents a fairly low percentage of expenditure, but the Commission does believe, as the governments also clearly believe, that fraud must be stamped out. And to that extent, it has been the governments who, a year ago, gave the Commission permission to take on more staff to look after